It was an ordinary mission for the crew of the Aegis, a human exploration ship traveling through the uncharted regions of space. The galaxy had always held mysteries, and humanity had made it their goal to uncover as many as possible. But nothing could have prepared them for what they would find on the planet called Irishix. The planet was located in a distant star system, far from any well-known civilization. Scans of Irishix had shown little promise in the past. It was labeled a dead world, with no signs of intelligent life or valuable resources. The planet had been ignored by explorers and traders for centuries. But something about this mission was different. The Aegis had been ordered to take a closer look, and the crew, eager for any discovery, made the journey without question. As the ship descended through Irishix's thick atmosphere, the crew watched in awe. Despite the planet's desolate reputation, there were signs of life. A faint pulse of energy emanated from the surface. Unlike anything they had seen before, they decided to investigate further. The Aegis landed in a vast, empty plain. The air was thin, but breathable. The crew stepped out cautiously, scanning their surroundings. The landscape was eerie, silent, abandoned, and lifeless. Strange ruins dotted the horizon. Structures that seemed to have been built long ago by a race far more advanced than humans. The architecture was alien but beautiful, a combination of sharp angles and smooth curves that suggested both intelligence and artistry. Despite the planet's condition, there was a strange beauty in the ruins that captivated the crew. Captain Laura Hayes, the leader of the crew, felt a sense of unease. Something about the place didn't feel right. "Stay alert," she ordered, her voice calm but firm. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." The crew spread out, scanning the area with advanced equipment. As they ventured further, they stumbled upon the remains of an ancient city. The buildings were tall, their surfaces cracked and weathered by time, but still standing. It was clear that whoever had built this city was capable of incredible technological feats. Yet there were no signs of life. No people, no movement. Only the eerie silence of a long-forgotten world. Then something caught their attention. At the center of the city was a massive structure, unlike anything they had seen. It was a pyramid-shaped building, its surface covered in intricate symbols and markings. The crew approached cautiously, and Captain Hayes ordered them to scan the structure. "Captain, you need to see this," said Lieutenant Mark Tran, the ship's engineer, over the comms. His voice was filled with excitement, but there was also an underlying tone of caution. Hayes quickly made her way to the structure. The markings on the building began to glow faintly, as though reacting to their presence. It wasn't just any ordinary structure. It was some kind of ancient machine, perhaps a relic from a once great civilization. But who were the creators of this city, and where had they gone? As they continued their investigation, the crew discovered something even more incredible. Hidden beneath the rubble of the city were the remains of the planet's inhabitants. Tall, slender beings with dark skin and elongated limbs. They were unlike any species the crew had ever seen. Their bodies were covered in strange tattoos and patterns that seemed to tell a story. But what struck the crew the most was how these beings had lived. There were no signs of violent conflict, no evidence of war or destruction. Instead, it appeared that the inhabitants had simply disappeared. The buildings were abandoned, the streets empty, and the machines that once powered their civilization lay dormant. "This doesn't make sense," Captain Hayes said, staring at the scene before her. "How could an entire civilization just vanish like this?" As the crew continued to explore the city, they found signs of life. Albeit faint, a few of the ancient machines had powered on, glowing with faint blue energy. A small group of the alien beings, still alive but weak and frail, were hiding in the shadows. They were not what the crew had expected. These beings had survived, but only just. Their numbers were dwindling, their once great society reduced to a handful of survivors. Captain Hayes and her crew realized that this was no ordinary discovery. This was a race that had been forgotten by time, abandoned by every other civilization that had passed through this region of space. The Urak, as the survivors would soon reveal, were a species that had once been great, but were now on the brink of extinction. The crew knew one thing for certain: they could not leave these beings behind. They had a responsibility now. Humanity had always been known for their compassion, for standing up for the weak and oppressed. And now they had a chance to do just that. "Prepare to bring them aboard," Captain Hayes ordered. "We're not leaving anyone behind." In that moment, the Aegis became more than just an exploration ship. It became a lifeline for a race that had been abandoned by the galaxy. And the crew of the Aegis knew that this was only the beginning of a much bigger story. As Captain Hayes and her crew continued their work on Irish 6, they realized they were standing at the edge of something truly extraordinary. The Urak, as the surviving members of this alien race called themselves, had once been powerful, influential, and respected by other galactic civilizations. But centuries of silence had passed, and their story had been lost to time. The crew of the Aegis had just discovered the remnants of that lost history. The Urak survivors, frail but intelligent, had gathered in the city's central chamber. Their leader, a thin, elderly figure named Zeran, spoke to the humans with a voice filled with both sadness and hope. "We are the last of the Urak," he said, his words soft yet full of meaning. "Our people once spread across the stars, creating alliances, trading knowledge, and advancing civilization. We built wonders that even your species cannot yet dream of, but it was not meant to last." Captain Hayes sat quietly, listening intently, as Zeran recounted the tragic story of the Urak. Their civilization had flourished for millennia. They had been at the forefront of scientific discovery and intergalactic diplomacy. The Urak had been a peaceful race, seeking to help others, sharing their knowledge freely with anyone who needed it. At the height of their power, they had been invited into a grand council of species, a coalition that aimed to maintain balance and peace in the galaxy. But that peace did not last. As the Urak grew more powerful, their influence began to threaten other species who had their own ambitions. It was then that the betrayals began. One by one, the other members of the Galactic Council turned against the Urak, seeing them as a potential threat to their own power. They started to cut ties, to isolate the Urak, claiming that their advanced technology was dangerous. Trade agreements were canceled, and allies withdrew their support. Zeran's eyes grew distant as he continued, clearly reliving the painful memories. "We tried to fight for our place, for the respect we had earned. But the betrayal came in many forms. Some civilizations turned their backs on us, while others took advantage of our weaknesses. They exploited our technology, and when they had taken what they wanted, they left us to die. Alone, forgotten." Captain Hayes felt a lump form in her throat. The tragedy of the Urak's downfall was impossible to ignore. But even more shocking was the realization that other civilizations, those who had once been their allies, had not only abandoned them, but had actively worked to erase their existence from history. The Urak were not just forgotten. They were intentionally erased. Why didn't anyone come to help? Lieutenant Tran asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Why didn't other races step in when they saw what was happening? Zeran shook his head slowly, as though the answer was something that had haunted him for years. The galaxy is a place of selfishness. Many races only care for their own survival. When a species grows too weak, too vulnerable, they become expendable. And when the Urak became a threat to no one, when we no longer had anything to offer, we were left to fade away. The crew of the Aegis sat in stunned silence. It was hard for them to imagine such cruelty, such indifference to an entire race that had once contributed so much to the galaxy. The Urak had been victims of an unforgiving universe, where power and resources ruled everything. And yet, despite everything they had endured, the survivors still carried hope in their hearts. It was a testament to their strength and resilience. Zeran looked at Captain Hayes, his ancient eyes filled with both sorrow and something else: determination. "We cannot undo the past, but perhaps we can rebuild." You, humans, you are different. You came to us not for power, not for resources, but because you saw our suffering. For the first time in centuries, someone cared. That is why we trust you." Captain Hayes felt a deep sense of responsibility settle in her chest. The humans were not here to conquer or take what was left of the Uraq's advanced technology. They were here to give, to help, to ensure that this race, this ancient people, would not be left to fade into nothingness. The humans had the power to restore the Uraq, not just physically, but in the eyes of the galaxy as well. "We will not abandon you," Captain Hayes said, her voice firm with resolve. "We'll help you rebuild. We'll ensure that the galaxy knows the truth about the Uraq. You will not be forgotten again." Zoran's face softened, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "We will work together," he replied. "Perhaps together, we can remind the galaxy that compassion is stronger than power." Over the next few days, the Aegis crew and the Uraq worked together to examine the ruins of the ancient city. They uncovered forgotten technologies and knowledge that had been hidden for centuries, some of it far beyond human understanding. Yet, even more than the technology, they began to learn from each other's cultures and histories. The humans taught the Uraq about their own struggles and triumphs, and the Uraq shared the wisdom of their ancestors. It became clear to Captain Hayes and her crew that their mission was far greater than they had ever imagined. They were not just saving a race from extinction. They were reviving a civilization that could offer wisdom and insight to the entire galaxy, if only given the chance. And in doing so, they would prove that humanity, despite all the challenges they had faced, was a force for good in a galaxy that so often seemed indifferent. The days following the discovery of the Uraq survivors were filled with activity and tension. While the humans aboard the Aegis worked tirelessly to assist the Uraq in restoring their civilization, there was an unmistakable wariness in the air. The Uraq, once a proud and powerful species, had been hurt too many times. Years of betrayal had left deep scars, and now they faced an uncomfortable question. Could they trust these humans who had come from a distant planet, offering help when so many others had abandoned them? Captain Hayes could feel the weight of this hesitation. Though the Uraq had accepted their initial aid, it was clear they remained cautious. Zoran, the leader of the survivors, often spoke in measured tones, not fully committing to their partnership. The crew had noticed how the Uraq watched them closely, their eyes filled with doubt, as if expecting the humans to betray them at any moment. "I understand their reluctance," Captain Hayes said to Lieutenant Tran one evening as they stood on the bridge, watching the stars drift by. "They've been burned before. The others left them to die. I can't imagine how that feels." Lieutenant Tran nodded. "But we're not like the others. We're here to help, not take advantage of them." "I hope they realize that," Hayes replied, her voice soft but filled with concern. "I just don't know how to convince them. Every gesture of kindness feels like it's being measured, as though they're waiting for us to prove we're not like the ones who left them behind." The next day, Hayes called a meeting with Zoran in the command center. She could sense his uncertainty, and she needed to find a way to bridge the gap between their two species. "Zoran," she began, "I know you've seen a lot of betrayal in your time. I can't undo that. But I promise you, we're not like the others. We came to you because we believe in doing what's right." Zoran met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "You speak of trust, Captain, but trust is earned. And our people have lost so much. How can we trust that you won't turn your back on us once we've become weak again? How do we know you won't leave us the way the others did?" Hayes paused, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She could see the deep fear in his eyes, the pain of knowing that no one else had cared enough to stand by them. "We won't leave you," she said, her voice steady. "We will stand by you, but I can't ask you to believe me on my word alone. I can only show you with my actions. We're here to help you rebuild, not to take from you." Zoran looked at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers as if weighing her very soul. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I want to believe you, Captain. But there are many in our group who do not share my view. They are afraid. They have seen too many promises broken." The tension in the room was thick, and Hayes knew this was a delicate moment. "We understand. We're not asking you to forget your past, Zoran. We're asking for a chance to prove that we are different." Zoran's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, there was a flicker of hope. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "but I cannot speak for all of my people. Trust takes time, and we are not sure we can afford to waste it." Over the next few weeks, the relationship between the humans and the Urak remained strained but respectful. The humans continued to assist in the restoration of the Urak cities, offering food, supplies, and advanced technology to help their new allies rebuild. They repaired old machines, fixed energy generators, and helped restore communication systems that had been down for centuries. Yet every step forward seemed to be met with an equal measure of hesitation from the Urak. They would accept help, but they always held a part of themselves back. One evening, as the sun set over the ruins of an ancient Urak temple, Lieutenant Tran approached Captain Hayes with an update. "We've made some progress on the energy systems. It'll take a few more weeks to fully restore power to the central hub, but we're getting there." "That's good news," Hayes replied, smiling at the progress they'd made. But her smile faded when she noticed Zoran standing nearby, watching them from a distance. The old Urak leader had been observing the humans' work, and his gaze seemed to carry both hope and doubt. Hayes knew that this wariness was a constant companion to the Urak, a shadow that followed them wherever they went. Tran noticed her gaze and asked, "What's on your mind, Captain?" "I just wonder if we'll ever truly earn their trust," she admitted, her voice tinged with doubt. "They've been through so much. I don't know if any amount of help can undo the damage done by all those who abandoned them." Tran placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're doing the right thing. You can't change the past, but you can shape the future. The Urak are starting to see that, even if it's hard for them to admit." Hayes sighed, knowing he was right. Trust was a fragile thing, and it couldn't be forced. The humans could only prove themselves through their actions, day by day. It was a slow process, but the hope was there. And perhaps with time, the Urak would begin to believe it too. As the days passed, the Urak slowly opened up, though it was still a fragile bond. Some began to speak more freely with the humans, while others remained quiet, their fear of betrayal still too strong to overcome. The humans, however, never wavered. They continued to work with the Urak, proving their commitment to helping rebuild a civilization that had been torn apart by the indifference of the galaxy. Captain Hayes knew that their journey was far from over. The path to trust was long, and the scars of the Urak's past would not disappear overnight. But she also knew one thing: the humans would not give up. Not now. Not ever. Weeks had passed since the crew of the Aegis had first made contact with the Urak, and despite the slow progress, the humans were starting to see signs of change. The initial suspicion and reluctance from the Urak were still present, but small acts of trust were beginning to form. Captain Hayes knew that their work had to continue, that every repair and every shared moment of progress would slowly help build the bridge between the two species. The Urak had always been a proud and intelligent race, but they had suffered so much that their fear of being hurt again was a constant barrier. Every gesture of kindness from the humans was met with cautious optimism, but there was always a lingering question in their eyes: what happens when the humans leave? Captain Hayes couldn't blame them. After all they had endured, it was impossible for the Urak to simply forget the pain and betrayal of their past. But still, there were moments where the walls began to crack. Zoran, their leader, who had once been so closed off, was now talking to the humans more openly. It wasn't much, but it was a start. One day, as the crew worked on restoring a large power core in the central hub, Zoran approached Captain Hayes. He had been watching the work with silent interest, and it was clear that he had something on his mind. "Captain Hayes," Zoran began, his voice low and measured. "I've been thinking about what you said. About trust, about rebuilding." Hayes turned to face him, wiping her hands on her uniform. "Yes, Zoran. What's on your mind?" "I'm beginning to see the truth in your words," he admitted, his gaze drifting to the power core that was being carefully restored by the engineers. "The Iraq. We were once great, but we were also naive. We trusted too easily. The others who turned their backs on us, they were not what we thought they were. And now, I fear we may never be able to trust again." Hayes felt a pang in her chest as she listened. The Iraq had truly been betrayed, not just once, but by so many different civilizations, and their fears, their hesitation, had only grown over time. "But," Zoran continued, his voice trailing off, "there's something different about you humans. You are not like the others. I do not know why, but I feel it. You do not offer help for what you can gain. You offer it because it is the right thing to do." Hayes could see the shift in him. It wasn't much, but it was something. A sign that the walls around his heart were starting to break down. "We don't want anything from you," she said quietly. "We don't want your technology or your knowledge. We want to help you rebuild. That's all." Zoran looked at her, his eyes filled with a complex mix of emotions. "I want to believe you," he said softly, "but I am still afraid." Captain Hayes nodded in understanding. "And you should be. You've been hurt, Zoran. You've lost so much, but you don't have to carry that fear alone anymore. We're here. We'll help you, and we'll never leave." The conversation ended with no immediate promises, but something important had changed. The Iraq were beginning to open up, and that was the first real step toward rebuilding their trust in the universe, and in the humans who had come to help. The days that followed were filled with more progress and more challenges. The restoration of the Iraq city continued at a steady pace, and the Aegis crew had successfully managed to bring the energy systems back online. Slowly, the planet's central hub began to hum with life again. Lights flickered to life in the once darkened streets, and the sound of machines working once more echoed through the abandoned ruins. Yet, even with the improvements, the Iraq remained cautious. They watched the humans closely, never fully relaxing, never fully letting go of their fears. But there were moments, small moments, that made all the difference. Zoran began to walk with the humans, sharing his people's history and wisdom in quiet conversations. The Iraq engineers worked side by side with the humans, learning from them and teaching them in return. It was one such afternoon when Captain Hayes and Lieutenant Tran stood together, overlooking the city's skyline, now illuminated by the faint glow of restored power. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the once empty streets. "I think they're starting to believe us," Tran said, his tone thoughtful. "I hope so," Hayes replied. "They've been through so much. I just want them to feel safe again." Tran turned to her. "Do you think we can truly make them feel safe? I mean, after everything they've been through, can anyone?" Hayes thought for a moment before answering. "Maybe not completely, but we can try. We can show them that we're not here to take from them, that we're not like the others. Maybe that's enough for now." As they stood there in silence, Captain Hayes felt a sense of determination settle in her chest. The journey was far from over, and the Iraq's healing process would take time. But they were moving forward. They were making progress, and every small victory was a step in the right direction. Later that evening, as the crew gathered in the Aegis's common room, Zoran joined them. It was a rare moment. He had always kept to himself, but tonight, something had shifted. The Iraq leader was no longer just an observer. He was beginning to engage with the humans. He sat at the table, speaking with them about his people's past, their achievements, and their hopes for the future. And for the first time since the Aegis had landed on Irishix, Captain Hayes felt a quiet hope blossom within her. The Iraq were not lost. They were simply waiting to be found again. The days of rebuilding the Iraq civilization had been long, but there was a sense of optimism in the air. The Aegis crew had worked alongside the Iraq, helping them restore their cities, their technologies, and their hope. It was clear that the two species had made significant strides in understanding one another, but there were still many obstacles ahead. For the Urak, the scars of betrayal were deep, and trust was something that couldn't be rebuilt overnight. Yet, despite the challenges, there was a growing sense of partnership between the humans and the Urak. But just as things began to settle into a rhythm, an unexpected event disrupted the calm. A distress signal arrived from an uncharted region of space, and it was unlike any the Aegis had received before. It was a Urak transmission, weak and fragmented, but unmistakable. Captain Hayes felt a sense of urgency wash over her as she stared at the screen. The message was clear, though its meaning was unclear. This is a distress call from the Urak. We are under attack. We need assistance. The message repeated over and over. It was not the same kind of message that the Aegis had sent out when it first arrived. This one was desperate. Hayes immediately gathered the crew. They all had questions, but none of them could answer the most important one. Who could possibly be attacking the Urak now? The Urak had no enemies, at least none that the humans knew of. They had been abandoned by everyone, left to fend for themselves for so long. Who would threaten them now, after everything they had suffered? What do you think this means? Lieutenant Tran asked, looking to Hayes for answers. I don't know, Captain Hayes said, shaking her head. But we can't ignore this. We have to find out who's behind this attack. We need to protect the Urak. They've trusted us, and we owe it to them to find out who's doing this. The crew sprang into action, preparing the Aegis for departure. The distress signal had pinpointed a location near a cluster of uncharted planets at the edge of the galaxy. It was a dangerous area, filled with asteroids and unknown gravitational forces. But the urgency in the message left them no choice. As the Aegis flew toward the unknown region, the crew couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was hard to believe that the Urak, after all their suffering, were now facing another threat. Yet, as they approached the source of the distress signal, the signs of battle became clear. The once peaceful space around the Urak homeworld was now filled with debris and wreckage. Ships, many of them Urak-designed, floated in space, their hulls scarred from what looked like a fierce battle. It was clear that the Urak had been attacked, and from the looks of it, the attack had come out of nowhere. Captain, we're picking up signatures from several ships, Lieutenant Tran said from his station. But they're not Urak. These ships are completely unfamiliar. Hayes' heart sank as she watched the strange ships on the screen. They were unlike anything the crew had ever seen. The ships were sleek, their designs almost organic, with smooth curves and sharp angles. The ships seemed to pulse with a strange energy, and there was something unsettling about them. They were clearly a formidable force. We need to get closer, Hayes said, her voice tight with concern. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. I don't know what we're dealing with here, but we can't take any chances. The Aegis carefully moved closer to the wreckage, trying to avoid the strange ships that had destroyed the Urak fleet. The crew could only guess what kind of technology these attackers were using. The ship's energy shields were unlike anything the humans had ever encountered, and their weapons seemed to be able to tear through the Urak ships with frightening ease. As they moved into range, the Aegis detected a faint signal coming from one of the larger ships. It was weak, but it was definitely coming from one of the Urak's own vessels. We have to investigate, Captain Hayes said. Prepare a boarding team. We need to find out what happened. Lieutenant Tran, along with a small team of engineers and security officers, suited up and made their way to the docking bay. They knew this could be dangerous, but the urgency of the situation left them no choice. The boarding team entered the damaged Urak ship, its corridors dark and cold, the walls scarred from battle. The crew moved quickly, scanning for any signs of life or signs of what had caused the attack. As they moved deeper into the ship, they found a control room that had been mostly destroyed. But amidst the wreckage, there was a faint pulse of light coming from a terminal. Lieutenant Tran approached it cautiously. "This looks like a backup communication system," he said, tapping the terminal. After a few tense moments, the screen flickered to life, revealing a single message. "We are being hunted. The Ftar are relentless. They know we've been working with the humans. We are too weak to fight them off. Please, if you receive this, send help." The message was brief, but it was clear. The Uruk were not just under attack, they were being hunted by a new enemy, the Ftar. And these attackers were not just targeting the Uruk. They were targeting anyone who might be aligned with them. The humans had unwittingly become part of the threat. "We need to warn Captain Hayes," Lieutenant Tran said urgently, as the crew turned and made their way back to the Aegis. As they returned to the ship, Hayes stood at the helm, staring out at the wreckage of the Uruk's former fleet. The reality of what they were facing was beginning to settle in. The Ftar were a new, mysterious threat, and they were not just attacking the Uruk. They were targeting everyone who showed any sign of alliance with the Uruk. The fight was only just beginning, and Captain Hayes knew that the humans were in more danger than they had ever anticipated. The discovery of the Ftar had sent shockwaves through the crew of the Aegis. Who were these mysterious attackers? What did they want with the Uruk? And more importantly, why had they now turned their attention to the humans? Captain Hayes couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that everything they had worked for was about to unravel. As the Aegis orbited the wreckage of the Uruk fleet, the crew scrambled to learn everything they could about the Ftar. The Uruk message had been brief, but it had given them one vital piece of information. The Ftar knew about the humans' involvement. That alone made them a target. "Captain, I've been going through every database we have access to," Lieutenant Tran reported, his voice tense over the comm. "There's nothing about the Ftar in any of the major galactic records. They're not listed in any known archives, and there are no references to them in any of the databases we've encountered. It's as if they've never existed until now." Hayes sat in her chair, staring at the blinking lights on the ship's console. "So we're dealing with a completely unknown force." "It seems that way," Tran replied. "But they must be powerful. They tore through the Uruk fleet like it was made of paper. And from the looks of it, they have technology that we don't fully understand." The reality of the situation was sinking in. The Uruk had been one of the most advanced races in the galaxy, and yet their ships had been no match for the Ftar. The humans, with all their knowledge and technology, were even less prepared for this kind of attack. "What about the message we found?" Captain Hayes asked. "Can we trace it? Maybe we can learn more about where the Ftar came from." Tran's voice came back over the comm with a note of frustration. "I've tried, Captain. The signal was weak, and it's too fragmented to get a precise location. All we know is that the attack came from the edge of the galaxy, in an area that's rarely explored." Hayes leaned back in her chair. The galaxy was vast, and the edge of it was a dangerous place, filled with unknowns. But this new enemy, the Ftar, had forced the Aegis into a situation where there was no choice but to confront them. "I'll need to speak with Zeran," Hayes said, standing up from her seat. "If the Ftar know about the Uruk, then we need to understand their history, their enemies. Maybe there's something we've missed." Within moments, Captain Hayes met Zeran in the command center. The Uruk leader looked worn and tired, his face etched with worry. It had been a long journey for him, and now his people were facing the same threat again. "Zeran," Captain Hayes began, "we've learned about the Ftar, but we still don't know who they are or why they're attacking you." Zeran's eyes hardened as he spoke. "The Ftar are an ancient race, one that few remember. They were once a part of the greater galactic empire, but they were shunned after their violent ways became too extreme. They were cast out, left to wander the darkest parts of the galaxy. Over time, they became legends, stories told to scare young Uruk children." He paused, his expression darkening. "But now they are real, and they are hunting us down because of our alliance with you. They see your people as a threat, one they can't allow to grow." "Why? What do they want?" Captain Hayes asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Zeran's gaze turned distant. The Ftar are driven by a need to dominate. They see themselves as superior to all other races, and they will stop at nothing to reclaim their lost power. The Urak were once a part of the empire they built, and now they see us as a symbol of everything they've lost. Our alliance with you is a declaration of defiance in their eyes. So they've been hiding for all these years, Hayes said, trying to piece together the puzzle. And now, they're attacking you because of us. Zaran nodded grimly. Yes, and they won't stop until they have destroyed everything we've built. They are relentless. Captain Hayes stood in silence for a moment, her mind racing. The Urak had been through so much already. To have a new, terrifying enemy appear out of nowhere, one that was as brutal and unforgiving as the Ftar, was almost too much to bear. We can't let them destroy what we've worked for, Hayes said finally, her voice filled with determination. We have to stop the Ftar before they wipe us out. But we need to understand them first. We need to learn everything we can about their ships, their tactics, and we need to do it quickly. Zaran's eyes softened, though the worry was still there. You are brave to face them, Captain. But know this, they are not like any enemy you've faced before. They will not fight fair. They will not stop. Hayes nodded, her resolve hardening. We will stop them, Zaran. Together, we can. As the conversation ended, Captain Hayes returned to the bridge, her mind made up. The Aegis was no longer just a ship helping to rebuild a lost civilization. It was now the front line in a battle against an unknown enemy, an enemy that could destroy everything they had worked for. The crew had a choice: face the Ftar head-on, and protect the Urak, or retreat and abandon everything they had built. There was no turning back now. The battle for the future of both the humans and the Urak had begun. The Aegis was ready. The crew had worked tirelessly over the past days, preparing for the coming battle. The Ftar were no longer an unknown threat. They were a deadly enemy who had already proven their strength and ruthlessness. Captain Hayes stood on the bridge, her mind focused on the task ahead. The Urak were depending on them. The entire galaxy, it seemed, was depending on them. Zaran had been working closely with the crew, offering what little knowledge he had about the Ftar, but there was still so much they didn't understand. The Ftar ships were unlike anything the humans had ever encountered. They had energy shields that could absorb almost any weapon, and their weapons were capable of cutting through the strongest hulls. They were fast, relentless, and highly skilled in combat. They didn't fight to conquer, they fought to destroy. We can't just sit back and wait for them to attack again, Captain Hayes said, turning to her officers. We need to take the fight to them. We've spent too long hiding, and the longer we wait, the stronger they become. Lieutenant Tran nodded in agreement. We've been studying their tactics. They rely on overwhelming force and fear. If we can disrupt their communication and control systems, we might be able to break their momentum. Hayes turned to Zaran, who stood by the communication console. The Urak leader had been a valuable ally, but Hayes could see the weight of the past on his shoulders. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the Urak's future. Zaran spoke quietly. The Ftar have a main fleet, but they're scattered. They attack in waves, each wave more brutal than the last. If you can disrupt their coordination, it may give us the opening we need. But be prepared. They are not like other enemies. They will not hesitate to destroy everything. Captain Hayes knew what was at stake. We're not going to give up. Not after everything we've been through. We're in this together. With that, the crew began their final preparations. The Aegis would lead the charge, using the element of surprise to infiltrate the Ftar's fleet. The plan was risky, but it was the only chance they had. The Urak would provide support, launching a counterattack from their repaired ships, while the humans would target the Ftar's command ship, hoping to disrupt their leadership. The ships were ready. The air on the Aegis was thick with tension as the crew prepared to leave the safety of orbit and engage the Ftar head-on. We've trained for this, Lieutenant Tran said, offering the crew a small, reassuring smile. Now we just have to do it. As the Aegis broke through the atmosphere, heading toward the coordinates where the FTAR fleet was stationed, Captain Hayes felt a sense of purpose like never before. They had fought for peace, for understanding, and now they were fighting to protect it. The lives of countless beings, human and Urak alike, depended on the success of this mission. On the comms, Saran's voice came through once more. I will stay with my people and guide them as best I can. If we succeed, it will be a victory for all of us. But if we fail, remember, you have given us hope. For the first time in many years, we know we are not alone. With those words, Captain Hayes steeled herself. They were not alone. Not anymore. The Aegis moved into position, and the battle began. The FTAR fleet was vast, their ships moving like a swarm of predators, ready to strike. But the humans and Urak were ready too. The first wave of Urak ships emerged from the shadows, firing on the FTAR vessels, drawing their attention and forcing them to spread their forces thin. Meanwhile, the Aegis moved in closer, its weapons firing with precision at the FTAR shields. The alien ships absorbed the blasts, but the Aegis kept moving, weaving in and out of the attack patterns, trying to keep the FTAR off balance. We need to find their command ship, Captain Hayes ordered, her voice calm but urgent. Once we take that down, the rest of the fleet will fall apart. Tran and the crew worked quickly, analyzing the FTAR formations. The command ship is at the heart of their fleet, he said. If we can break through their defenses, we can disable it. It was a difficult maneuver. The FTAR ships were everywhere, and their shields were almost impenetrable. But the humans were resourceful, and they had one advantage the FTAR didn't. They were fighting for something greater than themselves. The Aegis charged forward, dodging fire and weaving through the chaos of battle. The crew worked together, each officer playing their part with incredible precision. Finally, they broke through the FTAR's outer defenses and found their target, the command ship, hovering like a dark shadow in the middle of the battle. We've got one shot at this, Captain Hayes said, her voice filled with determination. Prepare the main cannons. The Aegis fired its weapons, the concentrated blasts hitting the command ship's shield with everything they had. The FTAR responded with a wave of their own fire, but the humans held their ground. The shield around the command ship flickered, then went down. Now, Captain Hayes shouted. With all the power they could muster, the Aegis unleashed its final attack. The blast struck the FTAR command ship, tearing through its hull and sending shockwaves through the fleet. The FTAR were momentarily stunned. In that moment of chaos, the Urak fleet launched a coordinated strike, taking down ship after ship. The tide of battle had turned. As the smoke cleared and the last of the FTAR ships retreated, the crew of the Aegis stood victorious. They had done it. Against all odds, they had defended the Urak and stopped the FTAR from claiming victory. Captain Hayes looked out at the stars, a sense of relief washing over her. We did it. We won. Saran's voice came through the comms again. The Urak will never forget what you have done for us. You have given us a future, Captain Hayes, a future we can build together. The battle was over, but the work was just beginning. The Urak had been saved, and humanity had proven that it was capable of standing up against the greatest threats the galaxy had to offer. Together, they had shown that no race, no matter how powerful, could break the spirit of those willing to fight for each other. And so, the Aegis and its crew sailed into the stars, ready for whatever came next.